I'm in Max. You are listening to Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. I'm in Max. Pursuing the RPG hobby with reckless abandon.
Why, hello, and welcome to Season 27, Episode 14 of Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. My name is Stu.
I'm Stork.
And I'm Kurt.
And we weren't here last Friday.
No.
I was tired. In this episode of Happy Jack's RPG Podcast, Axel writes in about intelligence as a stat. It's kind of a revisiting. Andreas writes in about games with a command structure, and Joe Crack chimes in on safety tools. But first, if you'd like to email us, you can email us at happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. That's happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. We're on the social medias, happyjacksrpg, all one word, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and MeWe. And if you would like to watch the show live, watch the show at 6:59 p.m. Pacific time at happyjacks.org/live, and you can see our faces as we talk. Why you want to do that, I don't know.
For what it's worth.
Intelligence as a stat reloaded from Axel. Hello, Stu and crew. To add to the recent Is Intelligence a Stat discussion, here's a point that wasn't really touched. On the meta level, for us as humans, it's quite easy to dream about things we'd like to be able to do or achieve. It's much harder to ignore skills and abilities we actually have. For example, playing a character that is blind or deaf or unable to speak is very hard if you as a player are not. Along the same lines, playing a dumb character when you're intelligent is also difficult. On the other hand, playing a character that is ridiculously strong or that can do magic, not a problem. Your imagination works just fine with that. In one of the groups I play with, I'm the only person that does not hold a PhD in a scientific field. Oh, jeez.
Oh boy.
We have been in parties like that at your house.
I don't know.
You have a lot of intelligent friends.
I know a couple doctors, not very many. Not enough to fill up a table at a game, I don't think.
Doesn't Bruce have a PhD?
No,
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
No.
He has a master's.
Oh, believe me, if he had a PhD, we would know.
I mean, he's got a tattoo of his master's thesis.
That's right. Have you seen? I'm right next to my PhD. Yeah, you're right. He never let us know.
It's like, how do you know if a singer has perfect pitch? Don't worry, they'll fucking tell you. For example, okay. On the other hand, playing a character PhD in a scientific field. Imagine my joy when the PhD GM presented a PhD level puzzle, with me as the intelligent mage having no clue how to even start approaching it. The puzzle.
That's just mean.
It is.
Man. That's just mean, knowing full well.
That's targeting.
Yeah. The puzzle was solved in the end by a player with a PhD in physics playing a dumb fighter. This can all be avoided if you follow the Happy Jacks mantra of create the problem, not the solution. Why problem make when you no problem have? I hate real puzzles, quote unquote real puzzles, that need one real solution. Also in quotes. He's emphatic about that. I want the characters to be able to find whatever solution works for them. So, intelligence is a stat if the game you're playing has it. It's your task as the GM to find the line between ROLLS rolls and ROLES rolls that works for your group. In that regard, intelligence is much like charisma or other social stats. Axel. Can't afford a PS.
I don't know what you guys talked about on this, but yeah. It is definitely a problem. Like, and that's when you need to make a good dice check. Like, you're smart enough, you figured it out. Here you go.
I think the original thing was about whether or not intelligence should be considered a stat.
And it absolutely should. I mean, part of the reason that we play these games is to play someone other than ourselves. If we are limited to our own intelligence, Jib has brought this up on numerous occasions. It is hard to play someone dumber than you are. It is impossible to play someone smarter than you are.
Well, you need to do the latter. You have to rely on game mechanics.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're going to have to.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, and if you're allowed to use the dice to do something physical that you physically could not do in the real world, because this is tabletop gaming and not the SCA or something, then you should be allowed to use the dice to determine whether you should be able to mentally or socially do something that your person self could not do in the real world.
You're right. There is a double standard there, or there used to be. But can I hit it? Yes. Roll some dice, swing your sword. It's like, well, can I outthink it or outriddle it? I don't know. Can you?
Well, see, here's where I disagree.
You tell
with
me
you.
what the riddle is. Like, no. I want to roll some dice. No, that's not how that works.
This is where Stu and I very much disagree.
Yeah, this is where I disagree because it's a role-playing game. It's not. It's not a roll dice game. You do roll dice, but it's a role-playing game. You are role-playing, so when you have a social encounter with someone, that is an opportunity to role-play.
I don't necessarily disagree with that.
I'm not necessarily saying that you can't put game mechanics in it when it's necessary.
Yeah.
Sure, but I mean, I would become awfully bored with a game if every time the players go to talk to someone, can I roll to see if I can convince them to do this thing? No. You will eventually, but how are you going to approach them for it? You know what I mean? Because you require the same thing with combat.
I do.
No one gets to make a tactics roll to say I want to be in the best position because I don't know tactics and I'm not my character, so I want to make a roll so you'll put me in the best position for this fight.
Some games have a tactics skill though that has it added.
But it almost never does that.
And people never use it.
No.
In my experience.
Traveler has a tactics skill,
and it gives you like a little bump to your initiative. Yeah.
Savage Worlds does too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I will do in those circumstances, I will just, especially considering gaming remotely via everybody's on Zoom or whatever, that I will aid if they ask me, what is the tactical, or they don't actually say what is a tactical advantage here. They just sort of say, I want to put a spell such and such that it encompasses these people. And I'll say, okay, well, it would probably need to go here in order to do that. He's like, okay. What they have done is they said, I want to attack. I want to cast this spell. I want to do it in such a way that it affects these people. Okay, great.
Right.
And similarly, if they're doing a social encounter, then I want to approach this person. I want to seduce, or I want to intimidate. How are you going to intimidate them? I'm going to walk in like I own the place and pretend that I have orders from their direct superior. That kind of thing. That is a how. And now we have parameters along which to judge whether those dice work.
Sure would be better if they just had a conversation, though.
I mean, yes.
No, I understand there are people who aren't interested in playing that way, but I certainly am.
Or just aren't adept at it yet. New role players
sure.
are very timid about that kind of thing.
Or there's mechanical, like if you're playing a bard character and you dumped a bunch of things into persuade and all that, there's a mechanical advantage attached to you rolling dice in those situations that you don't get if you're trying to bullshit your way out of it physically. Yeah. It's a slippery slope, and there needs to be a balance. Yeah. I agree with both of you, but depending on the system and then depending on the situation, whether you can talk your way past the guard, or you talk your way, or you roll dice past the guard, or maybe you talk for a little bit and then roll dice. I mean, there needs to be. I think every situation is going to be different.
Yeah, I would very much prefer, and would encourage my players to have the conversation, at least initiate a conversation first, and then, if it comes to a point where it's like, okay, I'm not comfortable, like, this needs to be a seduction scene. However, I'm not comfortable seducing my GM.
Neither is the GM.
The game,
not necessarily.
The game I'm currently running, my little sister is one of the players. All right, neither of us are going to be comfortable with that kind of an interaction. So, I mean, that's just, yeah, exactly, right? So, at a certain point, now, granted, that's maybe a bad example because she's playing a male dwarf barbarian who has a charisma of like 4. So
Deliverance and dwarves.
Hey. What's wrong with having a charisma of 4?
I played one of the first characters I played, not the very first, but one of the first characters I played was knowing me. It was a vampire character, and he had an int of 5 on a 5-dot scale, and I'm not that smart. It's like my character should be able to solve this conundrum, but. And I don't mean like just a word puzzle or something like that. I mean like how to sort out the vagaries of this situation. My character should be able to figure that out, but I'm not that smart. So
well, I mean, was this more like a moral conundrum?
No.
Oh, okay, all right.
No, moral conundrum would be a different thing.
Right.
But this was a sort of, I don't know that much about organic chemistry, and that's what I'm trying to solve.
Okay.
So
got it.
But my character is a doctor, so
it's real similar to the way this letter is phrased then as well. It's a similar situation.
I was trying to bring it back.
Yeah, I didn't see what you did there. There is no easy solution really, and maybe some systems are more towards it. And I agree completely that I loved that role, but that's when the game gets interesting, is when you see two people square off, or a person square off and try to talk his way out of a situation or something. That's when it's fun. But sometimes, you just want to like, it's like my character has an 18 charisma and has all these persuasion skills. Why can't I roll the dice instead of you're making me talk? Move on. But
then there's people like you. It's like, I don't want to roll dice. I'd rather talk.
No, yeah, I'm gonna die if we start rolling dice.
Right. All right. Thank you, Axel, for the email. Next is games with command structures from Andreas in Sweden. Who would like to read this?
I can read that one. That's fine.
All right.
Games with command structure. Andreas in Sweden. Hi, Stu and the crew. I sometimes make notes while listening to an episode thinking I want to comment upon something said or expand upon a point. Now I have a note about 2708 about a farming skill. I have no idea what it was you were talking about there. Anyway, I have a topic I think might have been covered before, but I think it might be worth revisiting because we have all forgotten it by now. Free League Publishing has published a game based on the Aliens movies, as many of you probably know. They've also started developing a new Twilight 2000 game, and both of these are similar in some aspects, namely that they are games where there's a command structure in place. I've not run any games with the command structure, and I know being bossed around is not fun, especially by your fellow PCs. The same thing can be a problem in other games like
Legend of the Five Rings.
Yeah, Legend of the Five Rings, yeah, or Vampire. There's a command structure in place. If we skip the obvious way, declare praxis, how do you work within the limitations and many possibilities of games with a command structure? Is it different when there's military rank involved, like Twilight or Alien? I think it could be fun to hear your experiences and ideas on the subject. Hang in there, stay safe, stay sane. Cheers, Andreas in Sweden.
I think this is almost two different discussions, I think. One is if the hierarchy exists within the party is an entirely different animal from if the hierarchy exists outside of the party. Like the party, like if you're talking about like, in a vampire game where you've got the hierarchy and no one within the party has any like position within the city, they're all equals among themselves. That's a very different thing than a hierarchy where the party is like a military unit and there's a sergeant and a corporal and 2 privates. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. Which is he asking about?
Well, I mean, it can kind of blend in Vampire for sure. Like, obviously the Ventru is going to take charge, but again, maybe not. Maybe it's a much more warlike game, and so the Gangrel takes charge, or the Bruja. But I can see that certainly some games, certain characters, they're archetype is built towards leadership roles or command roles, like Bentroop. And definitely with military things. I'm trying to think of a game. I guess we've played a couple military games too that you ran, and
yeah, I ran a con game which was like American Vietnam soldiers in Vietnam that find a cave that leads to like a underground drow city. And then I also ran the big blue monkeys from outer space, which is also a command structure within that was actually built to exploit that kind of.
I was actually just rewatching because I don't know, it came up on my feed, the one shot that we did of Vast Dominions with Stork was in that game, and playing Captain Dash Derringer.
Right.
And we were going after the.
I can't remember. Oh, that was when there was that goofy ass Mama. Oumuamua. That was it. It was the
cigar shaped asteroid.
Yes.
Exactly. And so we were going to investigate said, but it was of course called Mwahaha.
Right.
But yeah, there was very much a command structure there, and it was a competing command structure because there was the American command structure and the British command structure.
Right.
And we had two captains, and it was sort of who's captain right now, and who's captain on board the ship, and
exactly.
A lot of intentional conflict there within the command structure.
And that game, I don't know if that would sustain itself for a campaign, but that game, it would. I mean, the whole thing with the big blue monkeys and the NPCs that I made for that really leans into the command structure within a party,
for sure.
To the point where it's not just a matter that there's a captain of the ship. There's actually two captains. One is the captain of the ship, but the other one still is the same rank. And also, both of those characters had almost identical skill sets.
Yeah,
of course.
So they could both. The idea was that there would almost immediately be a rivalry between those two captains, and then the rest of the players. And the way those games usually ended up working is, at one level or another, the two captains would sit and bicker with each other while everyone else would solve the problem, and without them even noticing it was happening. And that happened fairly frequently. That's kind of the way that I mean, I didn't build it intentionally with that in mind, but that's kind of the way, the best solution in that kind of situation.
Well, there was a lot of talks of mutiny too.
Yes, right.
Other, yeah.
But I mean, the thing is, if you've got a game that is a campaign where you have a player character in the party that outranks the other players, you got to be really careful how that situation is going to play out. You know what I mean?
I've watched the Star Trek actual plays that we've had. I've watched a couple of them, and they seem to go pretty well. But again, everybody's pretty honors the Star Trek tradition, right? So you know, with Adam as the captain and all of the other people, they all seem to fall into place, and nobody threatened mutiny, as far as I know. Maybe I didn't get that far.
In Star Trek, there's very little pulling of rank, though. I mean, people just generally respect the command structure, but they respect the people in those positions. They've earned their position. They didn't weren't born into it. It was a meritocracy kind of thing, and you respect the captain not just because he's captain, but because he is who he is, right? And that's something I think peculiar to the Star Trek setting, because as Stu has frequently pointed out, almost everyone's an officer anyway.
In the regular old series, I don't think there was ever anyone who was enlisted. Lowest rank you ever saw was an ensign.
Yeah, well, yeomans, but yeomen who were usually the red shirts who died on the away.
Right, I was going to say, anybody with a red shirt was enlisted and died.
Right, yeah. And you had Chief Miles O'Brien, who was a chief petty officer on both Next Generation and DS9. But yeah, almost everybody else is an officer. But I've played in a couple of military setting games, but they've all been one shots. And I think you're right that a campaign would result in probably some interplayer friction.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, it's the same thing as you guys have talked about at Fair, right? I mean, you two and I at Fair, we play middle class sort of people. We're scum of the earth. We're troubadours. We're bards. We're musicians, and then somebody who comes over from court, who's playing a noble. It's like I know you. You're not a noble person, or not of that kind of nobility, but you come over and you get to lord it over me for
And we lean
minutes.
we lean into it. We battle and scrape and muddle around.
For 5 minutes, it's fine.
Sure.
For 5 minutes, it's fine. But a long campaign, that starts to grate on you. And it that false hierarchy starts to mess with your head.
Well, it's like once a season, maybe once every other season, the Queen will come to one of our shows and stay for like 2 or 3 songs. Extremely disruptive thing for the show. Right. If it were to happen every day, I would talk to management about it. I would say we're trying to do a show and we don't want to have to do the thing with the hats and the middle.
We're not really an environmental area. We're here and
no, because you guys didn't have to deal with this. We usually had a stage show that would be interrupted by her parade.
Oh, I used to love those days.
We had that. Day. We had to have that happen all the time.
Oh yeah,
anyway,
we went through that.
This is not this is not what we're complaining about here. But with regards to that false hierarchy, the players start to get this mess with your head kind of thing. There was a bit when they were filming Master and Commander: Far Side of the World. The director, Peter Weir and Russell Crowe came up with this idea when people showed up the first night. They were all given rank insignia patches, a tank top, a t-shirt, and a long sleeve t-shirt, and told the first night they had to sew their rank insignia badges on their shirts. And Marines had red shirts, and officers had blue shirts, and the regular enlisted seamen had white shirts. And while they were filming, unless they were, when they were doing rehearsals and training and everything like that, learning how to actually, sail a ship, they were all wearing these uniforms, and it was amazing how quick people broke up into these cliques based on their
rank, right?
On their rank. I mean, they weren't even they're in character yet. They weren't even saying their lines yet. But they were already just people click. People click off into hierarchies, and it can really mess with your head. And if that's not what you want at your table, then maybe don't run a military hierarchy game. It can be very difficult, or you gotta bring in a certain amount of check-in every so often.
Well, I ran a Traveler game, and it was Mongoose Traveler First Edition, and Dave wanted to make a character from the Merchant Prince expansion book. You make a character from the Merchant Prince expansion book, chances are at some point you're going to have a character who's got a really high social status. And his social status was like I think he was an archduke, or archduke, or it might have been like a distant member of the imperial family. It was super high. It was like 15 or 14. It was really high.
Yeah, you actually had to tweak some of the game.
You
you be related to the Empire.
The whole game I had to rework the entire premise of the entire game for that character. But one of the things that we never really needed to have sort of a pregame discussion about that. Although Dave did warn me when he started to make the character. He's like, it is entirely possible, and I may end up making a duke or an archduke, and he was right. So what we decided was that his character was the heir to the archduke, who was the archduke of a whole different sector, and he was on the run. So that was what we came up with as to why he would be out here with a bunch of miscreants. But one of the things that sort of worked itself out, but I can see there would be situations where it would not. Dave's a very easygoing person. So he is totally willing to play the sort of bumbling noble who's, has this very haughty, commanding air about him and gives people orders and then turns around and expects that things will just get done the way he says they should get done. And
very false.
But a little too oblivious to actually notice that people are doing whatever the fuck they want. And that's kind of that was sort of the dynamic that developed at the table. But I think if you're going to have a situation, and that's not quite the same as a military structure, but it's similar because, like, the party were all employees of his ship. Is the premise we came up with, because he had enough money to actually buy a freaking starship, and so if you sit down with the players beforehand and say, okay, here's the dynamic. How are we going to handle this dynamic? Because it is not fun to play a character that you don't get to determine what you do.
Yeah.
Especially for over a long period of time. A little bit here and there might make for an interesting story, but having to sit and follow orders all day long is going to get really frickin' boring and frustrating.
It's also hard on the person leading, too. I remember Kimmy talking about how exhausting it was to play the Ventru and be in charge and tell people what to do.
When she was Lord of the Island, yeah.
Right.
And she's like, oh, I got all these things I need to worry about. And it's like, and suddenly she was like almost relieved when it killed her character off.
Yeah, she was. And as much as she was trying to roleplay, she also wanted to be fair because, like you just said, she could very easily take away your player agency saying, I'm the Lord of this island, you go do this, or I will have you killed or you're exiled, right?
Right.
But she's a good enough player. It's like, although that's completely in keeping in character with the Lord of the Island as a Ventru, it does not for a good game make.
Well, I mean, also, in Vampire especially, it's like what you do and say to your immediate superior, prince, lord, whatever, and what you leave and actually go and do don't have to be the same thing.
No, that's true.
In fact, you just got to make it look like it was the same thing, which, I mean, and we had, Tim was playing a character who was as obsequious as any character could possibly be when he was in Adrian's presence, but when he was out of it, he was doing whatever the fuck he wanted. So, I mean, but I think everyone has to kind of figure out how that dynamic is going to work in the game, especially if it's a campaign. If it's a one-shot, I don't think it really matters that much. But in a long-term campaign, I think that's an important conversation to have.
It wasn't explicitly stated, but I think that's why in the pirate game that Jib ran that I was in on the stream, and now I'm blanking on what it was called, The Spaniard's Ghost.
Yeah.
We chose during character creation, none of us would be captain.
Right.
The captain would be an NPC, and it happened to be Bill Roper.
Right.
But there was still a command structure because we had first mate, we had quartermaster, we had doctor, and I was low on the pecking order as just like not even an able seaman, just a seaman, which was that's always fun.
Just
to
a
say,
little stain.
Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, one of the comments from the chat actually was everybody pretty much has to be on board if you're going to do this kind of a hierarchical thing from the get-go. An alternative option is an NPC hires the player characters as consultants, and so now you're not staff sergeant and corporal and you're specialists.
That's how Stu solved it with his last Traveler game, is that we were all sort of ex-military, all retired, and now we're hired on as a sort of a specialist or, contractors.
Right.
And a lot of these things, you like, if you see it in movies or television, the command structure is either it's so often automatically followed, except in points of tension where it's like, that's an order kind of thing.
Right.
Or it's just ignored. I mean, you think about the Battlestar Galactica, right? The newer version, because I never watched the old one. But you know, there
you're
was
missing
sort of
some 1980s gold, man.
70s, yeah. Exactly.
Was it 70s? I guess it
yeah.
was.
Yeah.
70s.
I don't remember.
But you know, the command structure there is just sort of understood. I mean, to the point where, spoilers, when an actual admiral shows up, Commander Adama is like, I have to follow her commands. I was the highest ranking officer in the fleet, and now I'm not.
So say we all.
So say we all, exactly. Now you compare that, for instance, to another classic 80s, which there was a command structure, but it was pretty much ignored, and that is the A-Team.
Yeah.
You had Colonel John Hannibal Smith, you had you had Captain Howlin' Mad Murdoch, you had Lieutenant Templeton Peck, and you had Sergeant B.A. Baracus.
Mm-hmm.
And they would sometimes refer to each other, or usually Hannibal would refer to the others as Lieutenant, Captain, Sergeant. But it's like, okay, you know that none of you are in the army anymore. You know that this is just your soldiers of fortune. This is really just I'm either referring to you by your former rank out of respect, or I'm referring to you by your former rank to get the point across that no, this is how it needs to be done.
Right.
But other than that, it was just four guys, you know.
You know,
And then there was Gilligan's Island, right, where everybody would just defer to Gilligan, the fool.
Or the professor. Yeah.
The captain never did anything.
No.
Skipper,
yeah. Exactly.
Well, he was technically the captain. Right?
No, absolutely.
Another interesting thing, and this came up during especially during the first couple of L5R games I ran, is when the authority figure is outside of the party, especially in L5R, is very stringent hierarchy, and as long as the party was around their daimyo, everyone was really on tiptoes and being careful and only doing what they were supposed to be doing, and really not taking much initiative on their own until they were away from the daimyo. Once they were away, then they could do whatever they want, and it usually ended up being a much more interesting session when they were sessions where they weren't in the capital where their daimyo was and weren't under their thumb.
And especially with L5R, because there's so many rituals involved in that culture anyway, that you had to make sure that you were doing everything correctly, from dressing right to saying the right thing to the right people, to chewing with your mouth closed. All these social mores that were involved with every little thing that you did in life there. Just being back in town was so controlled.
Yeah, it took me a long time to realize that you got to get especially in L5R, you got to get the players away from their daimyo. Because when the whole time they're there, they really can't. They don't have. I mean, they always have total player agency, but they really kind of don't if they're being quote unquote good samurai.
They have player agency. They don't have character agency.
Right. All right. Anything else on this? Or thank you.
I hope we actually answered.
I think we did. Thank you, Andreas from Sweden. Safety Tools Revisited from Joe Crack. Would like to read this?
I'll take it.
Go. And then after that, we'll talk about your.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Hey, Stu and the crew. Joe Crack from The Various Things here, and I've enjoyed hearing some of the discussion regarding safety tools. And while I don't think there's an easy universal solution, I do think the public X card actually works better than just privately notifying the GM. Like, if you notify the GM you are uncomfortable with a specific thing, let's say spiders, then the GM knows, and that's great. But that doesn't let other players know that they also should not bring up spiders. if you let the table know, which, yes, can totally be difficult, but then everyone knows a specific topic is off limits and unwanted. If a player then knowingly ignores that trigger, then that person gets kicked out of the table/group because they are intentionally trying to upset another player. Anyway, hope y'all are well. That was from Joe Crack.
My response to that would be the GM can let the players know, hey, someone at the table has a problem with this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking about stuff that's more personal and more serious than I have a phobia of spiders, obviously.
Well, I mean,
we're talking about real serious shit, right?
Right.
And stuff that people may not...
I wouldn't discount phobias.
Okay.
True phobias.
Okay.
We had a vampire game that was set in Regency London, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Regency era London, and one of
clothes.
the players has a phobia, not just an uncomfortableness, a phobia of rodents, of rats and mice specifically. That probably doesn't have a problem with rabbits, or chipmunks, but rats and mice. We couldn't mention rats and mice in in character, out of character at all without her getting extremely upset. She had no problem with spiders. I was playing a gangrel in that game, and if I'm trying to find out what's going on, I'm going to use my animalism and summon a whole bunch of
voles.
It won't be rats then.
Could you just say rodent at least? Would that help?
In
general.
I
you
forgot
can replace...
a couple of times. I genuinely forgot a couple of times, and I was reminded gently. Oh yeah, right. Sorry, and I wasn't kicked out of the game. But that was one of those. We talk about lines and veils. That was one of those lines that I wasn't supposed to cross, and I didn't mean it maliciously. I just effing forgot.
And that happens. I mean,
sure.
In our
exactly.
in our Call of Cthulhu game, Dave has a thing about with eyeballs, and I totally forgot about it. He mentioned it because it happened in game, and then I totally forgot about it, and something else happened. And I'm immediately like, oh shit, I forgot. I'm sorry, because you aren't going to forget, but I mean. So, when I mentioned phobias, what I was talking about is the fact that there's a lot of people who are self-diagnosed phobics.
No,
you know what I'm talking
people
about.
Who call it a phobia, but it's not. It's
right.
not really a phobia.
Right. So, but I mean, if someone's got a real serious issue about something, and they don't, especially if you're playing someplace and you don't know all the players, or maybe even if you do know all the players, you just don't want to talk about it in front of them. I don't think you should be forced to. And that is my issue with the X card, is that you do have to, obviously you're not going to sit and have a big long discussion about it, but you do have to acknowledge something that maybe you don't even really want to acknowledge in front of people that you maybe don't know very well, or it's just something you're not comfortable or not in a place where you feel comfortable divulging whatever that is.
Yeah.
Right? So, and the GM can always have your back for that, something like that. It's because the few times that someone has X-carded, not on table, but texted me or something, it's been like, boop, I just move the story away from that. If someone were to move it back, what I would do one of two things. I would either text them and say, hey, that's kind of been X-carded, so let's avoid that. Or I'd just say it, hey, we're going to avoid this topic. And that way, you're letting people decide whether or not they're comfortable divulging that information or not. So, while what he's saying makes sense, I still think that you can do what he's talking about doing. It's just more work for the GM.
I don't think it has to be an either or.
No.
I think having the public X card there is useful, and then also just and it's I'm sure you are aware it's much harder to use in a remote play kind of online game kind of situation. So having that, just message the GM or slide them a note or just tap them on the arm if you're actually around a table one of these days, then that is also an option. And yeah, it should be up to the GM as the moderator of the game to not just steer his or her own narrative, but also steer the game as a whole away from that topic.
Right.
Right.
I even know as a player, if somebody slaps an X card, I feel awful. I feel awkward, and then I can't ever not unthink that whenever I see that person. You know, like, oh, there's something that happened to them that made them, and so now everybody knows, and the person has exposed themselves. You know, or it can be really, really awkward. You know,
it can.
I would rather have. It's bad enough to just tell one person, but at least you're only telling the one person, and then you're not having to lay yourself bare in front of a bunch of strangers.
And yeah, I completely agree. There was a game I was in. The last time we had a convention, like a real, like, in a hotel convention, I was in a game with a bunch of people I knew and some people I didn't, and there was a point where I got very uncomfortable, and that unwillingness, that personal unwillingness to expose my own frailties, kept me from tapping the X card, which was on the table. And
right, and then even if
I wish that I had. And
but if you did, then me as another player would be looking at Kurt, going armed with that information now, knowing that there's this thing that happened in his past. It's awkward for everyone, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I guess awkwardness cannot necessarily be avoided, but there can be ways of either mitigating or recovering from it. I'm not. That's not the right word. I'm not using. I'm not using my thesaurus properly. But I don't know.
Safety tools are flawed, really, and there is no real perfect example. I mean, Stu really does have sort of the almost ideal solution, which is you tell the GM, and then the GM, through various machinations, can steer the story and or tell the players, hey, we're just moving away from that. And that it really is like, you know, it's like talking to your therapist, and it's supposed to be confidential, but, you know.
And it's also making a huge assumption that you have a GM who's really mature or is mature at all.
Yeah.
And that is not always necessarily the case. It's certainly not I don't think it's a panacea in any way. But I mean, I don't know, the whole thing is, and we live in the age of technology when we should be able to come up with something that could anonymize that, I would think.
Right.
The little buzzers.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Thank you, Joe Crack, for the email. Oh, and now to your bonus topic.
Right,
I need to make a jingle. Bonus topic, bonus topic, we got a bonus topic.
I will try to keep this brief. Most of what we talk about, obviously, on Happy Jacks is tabletop games. But there is, of course, that other aspect of role-playing out there, LARPing.
The red-headed stepchildren of the role-playing game.
Sure, whatever.
They call us that too, I'm sure.
You realize that 2/3 of the people on this call are LARPers, or at least were.
So was I.
All right. So,
I got called to the principal's office in high school for running a killer game.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, yelled at too.
So obviously in this time of pandemic, the jokes that first came out that were amongst the LARPers that I knew were, you know, social distancing is easy to figure out, just stay out of melee range. Right? Right? I understand what that distance means. If I could not possibly engage you with my, you know, foam sword, then obviously staying out of melee range is a very easy mechanic to think of. But now we're 7 months in, and there are a lot of LARPs that haven't been able to do jack in 7 months. And a couple of them I know, specifically Apocalypse 47 is a LARP that has done some tabletop games in lieu of LARPing. They've sort of taken their characters from that and created tabletop games to accommodate that. One of the LARPs that I've been involved with, which is mostly a parlor LARP, that being AOKP, that Stork is also familiar with, since it's just basically people sitting around in a table talking anyway, that's been handled over Zoom actually fairly effectively. One of the complications with that is you can't really have side conversations.
Yeah, you can.
I mean, you can.
No, you can set up side rooms. The guy hosting it. I just looked into this. The guy hosting it has to enable them, but you can set up side rooms that people can enter into and go out of.
Okay, I've been hosting, and I haven't been hosting for LARP yet, but I'm going to be hosting my first tomorrow night, actually.
You can't access.
I haven't figured out how to set up those side rooms yet, but I want
you
to.
can't access the options for that in the Zoom software. At least not last time I looked. You have to actually log into your Zoom account on a web browser.
Oh, okay.
And there's a place in there where you can enable. They have a name for them, side rooms or something like that.
Breakout rooms.
Breakout. I think they're called breakout rooms. And you can go in and enable them, and then you have to. There's different settings. So yeah, I mean, I think Zoom is probably very well suited to hosting online LARPs. Very well suited.
It seems to be. It seems to have been working fairly well. But just sort of a touch, keeping an eye on the other aspects of our hobby and how some people are using the same technology we use to get our jobs done to get our fun done as well. I mean, the tabletop is not the only way of doing this, and it's still haven't been to a boffer fight in 7 months, which it's amazingly cathartic to beat your friends with a foam covered stick. So
I was just sitting here trying to think about how to combine these two, and I remember seeing it was on YouTube years ago. Somebody made like a live action video game where people would log in, and then these text chats would come up, and the person would give them the choice, and they would say, do this, and so the live action person would get the gun and go over there, and it was like a first person shooter, but the people were real doing it, and that the person was telling them to do. It was really clever and really well done. It's really fun. You could probably check it out, but
yeah, I suppose that the LARPs that are out there that are Nerf LARPs, where you're definitely staying far enough away because you're shooting each other with Nerf guns, could theoretically maybe still work in a social distancing world.
You don't want to chance it, though.
You don't want to chance it.
At some point, you got to go gather your ammo and reload. And
right. What is it? By Night Studios or whatever they call it, Mind's Eye Theater, whatever they call it, the LARP version of White Wolf,
right?
Could actually still work because their LARP, or their combat is all done via.
Right.
So, I mean, that can be done over Zoom just as well as it can be done in person.
Maybe better.
Maybe.
Because everyone can see it.
Yeah, well, that's true. Well, I mean, it would usually take off. You'd have a storyteller adjudicate, kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, those kinds of things can still work. It just a matter of adjusting for how much you want it to work.
I like the term parlor LARP too. So I mean, you could technically take a LARP and then just turn it into, like, as you say, a long sort of conversations and meetings, and so it's a game of more policy making and
I mean, most White Wolf LARPs are really parlor LARPs. The terminology that I've heard most is you've got parlor LARPs where it's a bunch of people in a room talking to each other. You've got boffer LARPs, which are a bunch of people hitting each other with foam covered sticks, and there are theater LARPs as well, which are a little bit
Ren Fair.
Ren Fair, kind of. Yeah, I mean that's sort of, but very few are wholly one or the other thing. There's usually some amount of little column A, little column B. But yeah, just sort of that they do exist, and some of them are still out there and actually still looking for new players. So,
I wonder how they did it. I should probably check it out. But there's a bunch of Broadway musicians have gotten together and they did basically a murder mystery musical. But it's all.
So a murder mystery musical. I have not. There's a straight play. That is one of the longest running straight plays off Broadway ever, called Sheer Madness, and it is a murder mystery play where you watch the first act, and then in the second act they try to solve what happened with audience participation.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a good show.
Well, I'm just saying that is an interesting way to sort of make a live action LARP where everybody still has a role to play because you're solving a mystery of some sort, and the template is out there. I'm sure it could be adapted in some way to make your parlor LARP interesting, where everyone's at home working on a whodunit.
Sure, yeah. There are ways of doing it. It's always about coming up with the creative solution, and that's pretty much always what role playing games are about anyway. So
my kids are playing this game. It's a MMO. It's a really simple one. I think it's called Among Us.
Among Us, yeah.
Yeah. And it's for those of you for the 5 people out there that don't know what it is. It's get on there and it's the thing, right? So somebody's an intruder or an imposter, and the rest are all real people, and then you have to figure out who it is. And it's very much Alien. It's very much the thing. It's a very simple sort of game, and it's absolutely addictive and brilliant. And again, I think you could do something like that with a LARP, especially over Zoom as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, you're right. It just takes a little shift, but I think these things could be handled really, really well. And you could even have somebody with a GoPro on, that you've worked out with a storyteller running around and looking at things for people. It could be really fun.
By the way, the chat room is now trying to decide whether or not to vote you, Stork, as the imposter.
There's nobody dead in the
well, you did have a demon in your lap earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Damn flirkins.
That's familiar.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end it.
All right.
What?
Wow, not even an hour.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us for season 27, episode 14 of Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. My name is Stu.
Stork.
I'm Kurt.
And we'll see you next week, 7 p.m. Pacific time, happyjacks.org/live. Everyone stay safe, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We pursue this hobby from Michigan to Australia and maybe East Timor. Be it riffs or exalted, GURPS or Dungeons and Dragons. Hero, Pathfinder, Fate or Savage Worlds, evil plots will be usurping, though we could do with less burping. Happy Jack's podcast will be douchebags all.
The preceding program has been a presentation of the Angry Folk Media Empire.
Bum, 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 bum.